Welcome, everybody, to a special Saturday edition of Read, Write, Local, Unbound, where we meet local authors and some from far away, and some who, like today's author, are kind of both. And we talk about their books, we talk about writing, and so it should be of interest to people, not just who like to read them, but who want to write themselves. So I'd like to welcome Geoffrey Simpson. Jeff is an Avon Lake, long time. He grew up here, native, we could say. But right now he is calling us from Germany. And we also have some family with us today, so thank you for joining us. And I guess I'd like to get right into it. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you came from and how you got to where you are now in Germany?
Hi, Jerry. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me to your Read Write Local organization, and also for putting the whole thing together. It's a great channel for all authors to be able to speak about their books.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm born and raised from Avon Lake. Ended up going to Kent State University. Circled around in the engineering world and found a expatriate position over in Germany. This was quite a few years ago. During those 2 years, I, of course, like many others, had found a wife. We came back to America for a short while, but ultimately wound ourselves back up to her hometown. So we've been here for about 6 years now already, with a couple little kids, and only a stone's throw away from Oma and Opa.
Oh, you've got an Oma and Opa really close. Well, that's very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you ended up in Germany, you're an engineer, but always in the background, but not always, because you told me in an earlier interview that you were a reluctant reader. So you weren't reading piles of books like some authors do, but when you did find books, you kind of used them as a jumping off point, huh?
Yeah, that's right. So I was very much a reluctant reader. In fact, my mom, who's present, was even trying to pay me to read books, and I didn't make a lot of money on that process. But yeah, I think one of my key challenges reading as a kid was I'd get stuck on some idea that I'm reading through. My brain would go off on some tangent, thinking of the outside world or other stories and pieces. And by the time my eyes kind of finished up to the chapter, I had to start over again. Had no idea what happened in this phase. I was always distracted through books. But ultimately, over time, I found a bit of a niche. I liked reading to some perspective, and found poetry actually gave me the ability to focus on it. So Edgar Allan Poe was actually one of my favorite poets through college.
I see it on your shelf.
Yeah, so I was able to really find something to grab my attention in a certain way that I can have a more deeper process of thinking about it. And over time, reading became more natural. You learn a little bit more about some tricks to stay focused as well.
But yes, it seems like from the beginning, as you went on, reading was kind of not just about what was in front of you, but what was possible. You're always thinking about, and it's kind of an engineer's mind too, what can I build with something like this? And I think that's just amazing what you're able to eventually build something. So then you're in Germany, you maybe don't know a lot of people there, and your job is very consuming and your family is very fascinating. And maybe you're not sleeping enough, but you want to find some time to do something. That's kind of how it started, huh?
Yeah, actually, it was a few years ago when I wrote my first book. And it really started off thinking about how I can get out, explore the world more, having very much a full-time job, working 10 to 12-hour days, family with young kids. And I was really looking for something that I can do with my time in a piece of time during the day that I had access to. And ultimately, mornings became that part. My first book was really just to play around, expand on my creativity, just for fun, and using that. That's right, the three hairs.
The first one, yes.
Yeah, and in the three hairs, I would start waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to write, and then I would set up my alarm clock a little bit early at 5:30. And the more I got into it, the earlier I started writing, and ultimately I found a border between sanity and insanity. So I had a daily alarm clock at 4 o'clock in the morning every day. So yeah, that was my piece of time, 2-3 hours a day just to write.
And I guess that I'm just thinking about the whole three hairs concept, and you're eventually going to have a third book in it. It's really kind of reminds me of a lot of books I read when I was younger, and you probably did too, of some kids who kind of stumble into something really big that they're actually part of. It's their destiny, but it's tied into history and something that may potentially affect the entire world, which is kind of weird from a small town, but it's very foreboding, and sometimes it seems very dark, but I think there's some hope in there.
Yeah, the Three Hairs was at a time when there's a lot of political upheaval going on. And I guess it's still the case today, and maybe always has been. But I did take a children's story and try to find a real civil perspective to what they're trying to accomplish. Turned into a very much a good versus evil story, a band of small kids that have been referred to as something, a very Goonies style of group. And they go up against this evil mayor with a henchman that's behind them. That's turning to the secret society themes and looking at the politics and how things could be going, but keeping it really on that middle school age level. For one, was a really fun book to put together.
Mysteries, puzzles, and an ancient sort of rivalry and conspiracy. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
That goes back to the country's founding or before. So I think that's great how you bring in a lot of history and stuff into this and put this kind of almost a plausible place. So yes.
Yeah, it's actually 2 books have been published. The 3rd and 4th book are still they're in a form of development. I did step away from that for the novel that we're primarily discussing today, but yeah, there'll be 2 more Three Hairs books in the future.
We'll be looking forward to them. So then let's get to the Slumber. Just came out this year earlier, and looks like we already have some fans here of the book. Good. Why don't you talk? I'll just let you talk about where this all came from, because it's part of your history, as well as a special story in an audience that you're reaching, and a plausible future that maybe I see some similarities between this and the Three Hairs. The idea that some elite places themselves above everybody else, and yet the underdogs are going to take it from them. So I kind of see that similarity there too, but I'll let you talk about this one.
Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly it. I do spend a lot of time. In fact, quite a few book ideas I have in it are still playing on this whole society feeling and how it fits together, because it's quite tangible. It affects our lives every day. To have a story that's on a fiction level that can tie in some personal feelings and personal ideas is really a good way to pull through. So the Slumber set in 2083. I had to be very careful not to make it a science fiction book, although categorically it's certainly there. It's perhaps more speculative, if you wish. But to make it very realistic in today's perspective, I really hang on to one key point that separates today versus 2083, and that looks into the genetic engineering side of things. The way I keep myself focused in writing the novels, I've got 3 key points to the book. One of which is the genetic engineering capabilities have created this split society, the haves and the have-nots. And as this genetic engineering is more and more capable, naturally those who have more money, more wealth in their families are able to get more elite packages and can actually further divide that path. The second point is, now that you've got this concept that human beings as a whole are able to be enhanced, whether it's eyesight or hearing or strength or fitness, what does that do to the running world or to any athletics? So start playing with the idea of having athletes as being designer athletes kind of hatched from this whole genetic engineering piece. So you have the haves and the have-nots in a split society. You have the designer athletes who are pulling away. And then you've got this young athlete, the third point. He is a slumber, he's a have-not, he's an athlete, so he's going up against these elite athletes. And to pull a true underdog story all the way through, I really wanted to have the dynamic of those 3 points together. as a runner, formerly more competitive, now more on the jogger side, although once you have been a competitive runner, you sort of always will be. When I'm looking for solutions to parts of my book, a novel always poses a problem. You have an idea, you got a starting point and end point, and you need to build a puzzle in, even with the three hairs. So what I would do is very often go out for a run, and I would take this problem with me. And for an hour run, I'd be thinking about how I can solve this issue. And I go through 2, 3, 4 different points and really get excited about it. And the first thing I do when I get back from my run is I stop my watch. And then I write down a quick note about what I had kind of solved in that piece. And the next time I was working on my book, I would have already a solution in place. Now, at some point it clicked to me. It was actually in Florida last year in, I think, March. We all met in Florida right during the pandemic issues and had a cruise all lined up, which ultimately got canceled. And we had a lot of time, family time together in Florida, running on the beaches. There's a Cocoa Beach just down the road from NASA there. And I was running on the beach one day and I started thinking about writing a running novel. Recognizing that there's basically one running novel out in the world that's has created some great fame. It's called Once a Runner. Realizing that there wasn't really a lot of books in the marketplace and maybe a great potential for it. So instead of going after mystery books or these real genre type level books, I started playing with an idea. And that's really the starting point of this Slumber.
I think you told me too that the Once a Runner was a book that was doggedly promoted for a long time by the author at running meets and stuff. So you knew you were going to be an underdog trying to reach a wider audience because he had enough trouble, but there was a reward at the end.
Yeah, in fact, Once a Runner came out the year I was born in 1978. He very much was a track meet, cross country meet, selling out of the trunk guy. And what's interesting is he did become a cult, had a cult following. And at some point they re-released this book. He ended up getting a publisher, re-released his book. I'm guessing it was in the 90s, around 2000 or so. And overnight, he became a New York Times bestseller. It's a fantastic accomplishment for a running novel. But of course, you have to imagine how many years and generations of distance runners have been picking up and latching onto that. In fact, right over my shoulder is my copy of Once a Runner. Now I have the privilege of putting my own book right next to it on the shelf, which is a bit fun. But yeah, there's not much out there, and it's kind of a good guiding light.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you said that when you were writing the book and when you got close to finishing, you sent a lot of drafts, I guess, too, and circulated along the running community. And this was an opportunity for you to meet a lot of your people that you really appreciated, looked up to over the years, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And it was a little bit, I had a few contacts through my university days and my family that were looking at the earlier drafts. But really it was when I had a finished product in my hand, I was getting ready for publication, and I started reaching out for endorsements. So yeah, I have some people I know. I reached out to them, got some nice feedback. And then I decided just to take a chance, and I would write some more fairly famous runners out there. And a few of them came back to me right away saying, I'd love to read a running book, a running novel. It's just nothing out there. It's a diamond in the rough. So I started talking to people. Chris Zielinski is one of them. He was the former American record holder in the 10,000 meters. I really got to know him a bit. We traded emails quite a few times. And I also learned why he really latched on. He was an underdog. He came from a small farm town. He rose up, did very well through the university time periods and went professional. He was always considered an elite runner. And there was one magic day where Galen Rupp was America's best distance runner at the time. And Nike put together an event for Galen Rupp to break the American record. So they organized this, they got these people in, they got pacers organized, and it was Galen Rupp's time to set the American record. And sure enough, in the last mile, Chris Zielinski's sitting right there. And the event is fantastic. It's the last 2 minutes of the race are easily found on YouTube. But he is this underdog who had this shining moment, who just blew away the competition at the end, setting the American record, and was the first American to break 27 minutes. So a major milestone as well. So getting to meet him and some other people. I have two Olympic medalists right now reading the book, one of which has a silver and bronze in the 1500, which is just started reading the book now. I'm very excited about hearing their feedback as well.
You mentioned also earlier that the whole idea of running is not just a physical thing, it is a mental thing. And that when in your future, when you're engineering humans to do this and do that physically, you can't really engineer in grit. You can't engineer in that kind of has to be learned, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's really a key cornerstone to the book here. So on the very first actual page of the book, I have the dictionary style definition of talent. And it says natural ability or aptitude in a special field, a talent for running. And what's interesting when you look at the definition, it says natural ability. When you look at the DNA manipulation, that becomes kind of a question. What is this? What is unnatural? So is that also talent or not? And I liken the DNA theme to performance enhancing drugs, or even better equipment. Nike has a shoe out right now that is a superior running shoe that all of a sudden people are just latching onto, even if they aren't sponsored by Nike. So what is this performance enhancing subject, and how can an athlete rise to it? One thing that I wanted to bring up here, it's a little bit on the side here, but it's quite interesting. So talent itself is, if we can imagine, it's how big your heart is, your ability to process air and turn oxygen into your blood. It's about flushing lactic acid out of your body, things like this. This is all very physical, natural talents. In thoroughbred racehorsing, there is the average thoroughbred horse has a 7-pound heart, the average, all right? And there's a special gene that's out there in thoroughbred racehorsing, and it's actually interestingly called the X factor gene. And horses with the X factor gene have an average of a 14-pound heart, 2 times the size of the physical heart of an average thoroughbred. Secretariat is one of the most famous racehorses of all time. Films about the horse. Secretariat had a 22-pound heart. So if you're a distance runner, you're running your first 5K, or you've never run in your life and can imagine yourself sitting there, and you know that the guy next to you had a heart physically 3 times the size of yours. All right, what does that put in your mind? What is talent, right? So there's very much this genetic, physical talent happening. And to kind of go back more focused on what your question was, is the grit side. So now I've got this guy who's very naturally talented going up against a group of elite athletes who are designed with larger hearts and better ability to flush out lactic acid, for example. And what is that extra thing that he has? What does he have coming from the ghetto? What does he have growing up and living in a split society with his family, his work life, the situation with his girlfriend through the book? All right, all of these things really build up to something here. And that's this attitude that comes from a grit. It's a mental toughness. And I really want to make sure through the course of the book that you really latch onto the character. You follow through this grit that he has. And that is really the other end of the spectrum. So what is that? How do you measure that? And this is also, as a former competitor athlete, this is the difference between how you can compete and how you win races, how you can run fast times, and how you can really secure the big wins. And all of our elite athletes now have that grit. But this is really the focus here in the novel.
In many ways, and I'm sorry if this is digression, but what happened in the future is kind of an extension of what many parents, I think, want now and are getting now. So maybe they're not genetically engineering their kids to be superstars, but they're making sure, some of them, that they get into the right preschools, the right prep schools, the right universities, and they're sparing no expense, including cheating with hundreds of thousands of dollars, as we know in the news, to make their kids better than the rest, when maybe they just aren't. And also, these kids didn't have to work for any of that. Is it more about, like I said, with the athletes? Would some of these kids who are athletes maybe resent being made into a racehorse or a trained seal when that's not what they really wanted out of life? It's what mom and dad did. All kinds of fun things to play with, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do, I have three professional athletes that the protagonist goes up against. And I've tried to create a bit of a personality and a history between each one of them. And I very much touch into that in these. One of which is a daddy's boy. He's got the big filthy rich family behind him, but he doesn't really want to be a runner, but is extraordinarily talented. He runs quite well. One of the other, I don't want to say too much about it, but there's actually a reference to the next step here that it's not one of the main three guys, but he is referenced in the interview. And his name is Damian Prince, and he is truly designed for money. So he is designed as a racehorse in this book, and his ultra wealthy family goes not just to I'm having a kid who's highly talented, but I'm designing a paycheck, and that takes it a further step down the road, right? I wanted to stay away from the whole science fiction thing here and be a little bit more tangible and more, family based. But I did want to show a glimpse of where this really could get to even beyond that.
Yes, it's about what the parents' expectations for their kids outweigh and overshadow what the kids want for themselves, and they feel maybe like they have no destiny that isn't that is their own design. It's I'm destined to do this. I'm trapped. It's a thing I think a lot of kids are in these days.
Yeah, very much, very much, and you'll even see that the main protagonist, his own family isn't really supporting his running. They support him in what he does, but they don't really support his running. They don't understand, and really, from a father's perspective, it's more out of fear for what this child has to go through to try to compete even.
Yes, you don't know what you're up against. You are deluded. You will never win. I guess sometimes being realistic is can be pretty negative, but there are other times it's always a balance, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you don't dream, you're not going to overcome those barriers. But yeah. So I also understand you said that you're working on not so much a sequel, but a companion piece to this book.
Yeah, that's right. I have a plan for a follow-up book. It's set in the same world. It's got many of the characters are interrelated between the two books. The protagonist would be completely new, so it'll be a different angle, focusing more on cross-country running. It'll be a young lady from farm country, and the main goal here is that she's coming out of this really near slavery side of the world, if you will. For the Ohio people here, it's set in Grafton, Ohio, where the prisons are, and ultimately the prisons are set up as a dormitory style farm worker world. And this young lady has to rise up through things. Does get connected with some of the key people in the first novel, but her ultimate dream is to introduce a Slumber-based cross-country series that's carved out of farm fields across the country.
I'm really looking forward to that one as well. And I'm sure anybody who's read this book will. So I'm glad to hear about that. One of the other things we talked about earlier in previous times was, and what I want to find out from authors, not just how you write books, which is part of it, but what you do with them. Because everybody's got their own way of writing and plotting things out. And I think you said you've got some things that were natural to you and others you've learned from others. Could you maybe talk about some of those?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's two, if you want to be very polar on it, there's really two major categories of authors. One type of author is going to have a very, they're going to write 2 or 3 times the amount of pages they need, and then they start condensing and editing and tightening it into their final piece. Naturally, some of those people are very well organized and very structured. Some of those people are going to be a little bit more let it go where it goes. On the other side of the spectrum, which is where I sit, and as you mentioned the other day, really that engineering perspective is I have a very, very clear plan. I know exactly how I want my story to go. I build a very clear structure through. I start building the protagonists into the book, the secondary characters through each scene, how all the scenes are affecting the different people in a personality perspective, and all those little red lines going through, which are the little subplots, sub-stories. And I look at this in a major Excel table that I manipulate and build and shift. And I keep it light enough that I can go through and really let the creativity of writing shift and change this. So I'm not so stuck on that as my final piece. But I have recognized in all three of my books that it does stay rather close to that very original plan.
So it's kind of like a complex building blueprint, but if you change some of it the last minute or here and there, it won't fall down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing I would be nervous about writing my first book, if I hadn't done this, is let's say you're targeting for a 300-page book, 400-page book. How in the world are you going to find yourself as a first-time author hitting the mark on that? If you don't have a good plan, you don't have some kind of pacing that you're set up through the story, you might get to 400 pages and find out you just got through the first quarter of your story. Or you might get through 100 pages and found out you're out of information. So it's good to have a good, clear plan for the beginning.
Yes, as a writer with some practice, you can almost see things that other people don't about your own work and stepping back from it. And obviously, it's very hard to do work without some critiques and input from others, formally and informally. So there are some people in your life who give you some really good feedback before things even really get off the ground or before you get to where you're going to publish something?
Yeah, so looking at my most recent book, The Slumber, on an earlier draft, I brought my parents in. They would be the ones who are least susceptible to having a one-shot review. They're going to be looking at all the different drafts and watch the progression. Where if I'm asking a favor of other reviewers, really you want to go with them one time. So they're my sounding board for the earlier draft. Once I take that feedback and kind of start building and polishing, I would then go out to some key people who have either helped me in the past or maybe some new people that I've picked up along the way. And really, I go out to about 4 or 5 individuals. Interestingly enough, some of my friends on my very first 3 Hares book were competitor runners for Kent State. So when I had a running book come out, naturally they were all over it to get back into that feedback. So also as you write, the less feedback you need. On your very first book, you don't know what you're doing. Your confidence is all over the map. One day you think you've got this fantastic book, then you get some little feeling about someone's input, just reading between the lines, and you think it's horrible. As you get into it a little bit more, you soften your spikes and you kind of up your game. You learn from some of these changes. So really, you're looking more for content critique, mixing different
stylistic or structural.
Yeah. Also looking for confusion. As you write a book, your mind knows the story so well. There's a lot more behind what's written. So if you're reading through, a chapter may make complete sense to you as an author. However, someone else reading it may have no idea what you're trying to say. And that's
like continuity in movies and TV. It's you have this in your head, but then it's gone.
That's right. But there's no boom mics in that book, so that's nice.
No mics bobbing in and out. Great. So when you get to a point where you have the book more or less ready to go, I think a lot of authors, and I talked to a bunch earlier, saying, I have a book, it's out, hooray, now what? And hopefully people have thought about this. And I've had a lot of people who've come to me saying, I want this book in your library. So there's lots of things I like to think about as a librarian, whether I want the book in, but even before that happens, publishing a book, promoting it, marketing it, finding your audience, there's a lot to this game that I think you've experienced. Things like agents and editors and their roles that they play. So could you tell us a little about your experience with that?
Yeah, it's let's say trying to find a publisher is one of the most challenging sides of writing a book. Putting together 350 pages of novel is the easy part. in my first book, and I recognize that I was a beginning author, and I'm not going to be the guy jumping off the page to an agent. However, your first step is through the agencies. And what they're doing is they're screening out the books out there. They become your partner. They work for commission only from sold books. So they're putting themselves out there. And if they believe in your book and they believe they know how to sell it, they will go to a publisher and try to convince a publisher on how they could sell this book. And then hopefully they would get some signing contract for an author. That whole process means, with all the authors out today, it's very, very difficult to get past the agents. A lot of these agents have lifelong authors under their wings, so they keep coming back. So 80% of who they work with are people they've worked with for years. So they're only bringing in a few different people per year. These agents will get hundreds of requests a week from authors to represent them. So you have a single letter, a single chance, no book or anything like that, just one letter to say, hey, I have something unique. And if you can't get past that first letter, you're not going to get anywhere. So the Slumber, I sent out to over 80 different agents, a lot of custom letters, tried different angles. I had even a recommendation to lean a little bit more young adult with this book. So I played around with that idea, and I had 0 responses. I had form letter rejections across the board. This book is now it's 4.7 stars in Amazon. It's starting to sell quite well. Not a single agent would even look at it or get back to me. So if you can't get yourself through this and find a way that you can really convince them they're going to buy the book, you will need to start looking at another path. In The Three Hairs, I was quite fortunate. I had an old family friend point me in the right direction on how to structure books and work through them. His name's David Lender. He's an author of really Wall Street type crime novels, very interesting author. He gave me some pointers, and he also set me up with an editor to help polish up my book and edit it. And this editor, Janet, she is also a small press. So she ultimately did publish my first book. She was very excited about having the chance, and we worked together. So the Three Hair series, we're locked in together. We have a very good relationship. However, on the Slumber, I'm not targeting readers as my audience. I'm not out there trying to get genre customers who are mystery readers or science fiction readers or whatnot. So I'm not going to book blogs as my marketing campaign. I'm going after runners. And typically my main audience are 40, 50-year-old runners who had once been more serious or are now getting serious in the sport. And finding that audience is something that you're not going to have, a publisher's not going to find for you. So taking the leap of faith and going completely self-published on this was something I took, realizing the challenges of it, but once I got into it, it was very much worthwhile.
That's the thing is that you may not risk as much as a publisher does monetarily, but it is your own stuff to risk. But a lot of times what you're paying for with the publisher is not just the connections and the access, but people who know what they're doing as far as editing or knowing what sells or not. But some people don't want to compromise that. They figure, I'm not selling out, I'm doing this and it's going to work. The other thing I've noticed is that sometimes people who write books and are not part of the world, they just did the book, have no idea how many books are being written and published every year, like more than ever in history. Like I heard a couple of years ago, somewhere around 250,000, 300,000 new books are published every year. And I just look at bookstores, how many can they carry? I look at libraries, how much room do we have the shelf and how much budget? And if we bought everything, would people want to read it? So a lot of choices have to be made, not just by consumers, but like the middle people who provide this stuff. And they're kind of perplexed too. Is this a good, should I stock this book? Or is it going to be sent back in 6 months? You know, these are the sorts of things that they make decisions about too. But it's gatekeepers up and down the line on both ends, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And to give some perspective, so the Slumber had a very nice burst of sales going through a heavy marketing campaign I had done. And really what it got was it pulled up to about, if you look at Amazon, Amazon has a ranking of where it ranks against other novels. So my book was ranked in Amazon at about 10,000, right? It was #1 in track and field for a little while, but it was around 10,000 at that level. My Three Hair series, the first one, if I haven't sold a book for a few months on a novel like that, you're in the 2 million range. So if you want to start searching through the search list on Amazon to find a book, not many people get down to the 2 million book to find. So you're absolutely dead on. There's a unbelievable sea of books out there. And to be honest, that's actually why I stepped a little bit away from the Three Hairs, because I wanted to try more of a different approach. Because to be recognized inside the sea as an unknown name as an author is really an uphill battle. So I wanted to find an opportunity to look outside.
Mhm. Well, it's great that you're thinking about, again, this long term and about what you're going to be doing, not just next year, but 10 years from now. And having some targets and some goals, I think that's very good. And you tried something completely different this time. So I think a lot of aspiring authors could learn a lot from your example.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say, or shall we maybe turn it over to the audience for some questions?
No, let's turn it over. I think it's, I'd love to hear some questions.
Okay. Well, if any questions from the audience, unmute yourself and speak up.
I noticed that you self-published, Jeff, and you've named your own publishing company, Barking Boxer Press. Tell me how you started that process. Was it daunting?
Yeah, and actually, so because there are so many people out there who have self-published, there's actually quite a bit of good information of how to go through this process. The one thing that posed a bigger problem for me is that I'm sitting in Germany. So when I'm opening up a publishing house, which is nothing more than doing the ISBN number, the book identification number, if you're not a resident, I had to get German ISBNs. So you'll actually find that my book is registered as an international book through Germany, even though it's released in the US. But once going through that and really taking the deep dive of the learning curve behind it, you find pieces like the Library of Congress and how you get yourself an LOC number, and the registration process on this book, which is only 3 years after my first novel, was much clearer than when I had looked the first time. So the Three Hairs, I also made the decision if I was going to go with a small press or if I was going to self-publish. And one of the deciding factors was it was very difficult. I was not able to get an LOC number on the first book as a self-published author. Now it's what you do. So to go down that path, it's getting easier and easier. And as you can imagine, there's tens of thousands of people who have done this already, and many of them blog about the best practices. Yeah. So it wasn't so bad. But yeah, it's interesting that I had done the cover work myself. I wrote the book. I hired an outside contractor to do the editing process, and all the internal book formatting and everything I had done myself on all 3 books, actually. So there's really, from a creativity side, it's a wonderful project because I got to see all the aspects. And now, as going completely self-published, all the marketing's in my hands as well. So yes, daunting, and I would say almost a bit tiring at times when you're really not sure what your next move is for marketing.
Like your protagonist.
Yeah, exactly. But it's good to take a breather, right? So you get to a certain point, you turn things off, you turn your advertisements off, which I've done right now, let things trickle through for a little bit, and then prepare your next step. So from that perspective, you don't have a good sounding board because you're rather alone on the subject, but it is important to take that little pause between things.
Well, thank you for the question. And you got another one here? Go ahead.
I have a question.
Oh.
you have in your book, he has to deal with some injuries and the water workouts at Edgewater Park. How much of your experiences as a runner did you bring into the book, such as a stress fracture, which I remember your pool workouts with the stress fracture, but other tidbits in the book that come off your own running experiences?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because a lot of this book is really built on my own experiences, and some of them are very, very similar to what the protagonist is. And yeah, so in the book, the protagonist breaks his foot, and the very next morning, he swings his feet out of the bed, puts his feet on the ground, getting ready to go for a run. And only at the moment that the pain shoots up his leg does he realize that he's hurt again, thinking it was just a nightmare. And he falls to the ground crying. I remember sitting in Clark Dormitory at Kent State University having that exact moment, where you don't realize it was real until you put your foot on the ground and try to stand up. So yeah, little pieces like that. The water workouts is very much, I'd spent way too many hours in the Kent State swimming pool. And really there's a little moment at the end of the book where the coach cheers something to the athlete as he's getting ready for his big kick. And that exact phrase is something that my college coach said to me right when I was going after my personal record in the 5K. So very much to be able to build a novel based on personal experience gives you that depth, that feeling and passion that you can't just make up. If I were to write a novel about a tennis player, I wouldn't know where to begin, right? You can make stuff up, and as you become a highly experienced author, your research can pull you pretty far through, and interviewing people who were actually there. But as a self-published author, there's no experience like your own to really help you craft the book.
Good. Thank you.
Are you considering teaching your technique to young writers with the Excel spreadsheet that you described?
It's interesting. So I'm more than happy to. I talk to a lot of individuals who want to write, and I'll give them a little coaching, nothing official. But what I had done with the 3 hairs, and I'm glad you brought this up because it tips me off to something that was really a life-changing fun event, is Skype offered a program. They actually just canceled it, but it's called Skype in the Classroom. And what it does is it brings professionals of any type, and authors are relatively popular, is a school teacher can bring in an author to talk about their novel, talk about their craft of writing and things like this. So I had signed up for Skype in the Classroom. There's one lady in Salt Lake City who got me onto the idea. We did it just ad hoc and played around, and she had some writing kids, and we had a blast with it. So I had done in a course of about 6 months, 50 courses. It was a 45-minute to an hour session with students in the middle school age. The classes were anywhere from 20 to even 50 kids. There was even one with a full auditorium that I spoke to 5 different classes at the same time. And it wasn't about the craft of writing, although we did touch upon it, but really about inspiration and how you write and the emotions behind going through this process. And the reception was fantastic. I have a small envelope filled with all these thank you letters from these kids and things like this. But yeah, 50 classes or so. But what's really interesting is quite a few were American and Canadian, but I'd also spoken to people all over the world, Ukrainians, Poland, England, several classes in India. I had a Vietnamese class. So I had courses all over the planet. And sitting in Germany gives me a good access with time zones and things to this. And also with my job, I speak to multiple countries a day through work. So for me, it's from a cultural perspective, it's fascinating.
So do you hope to continue that, or in some fashion?
As much as I loved it, it was very time consuming.
Yeah.
And it was an evening effort. At the same time, I've got 4 a.m. mornings writing. I'm actually trying to get my running life a little bit more in shape. I've always jogged through, but spending more time on that. Full-time job with a new promotion here, and the kids in the afternoon. So really, I've exchanged that for more family time.
Yeah, can't do it all.
Yes.
That's right.
I have another question for you. It's something that's a topic of transition for us as libraries and for consumers. What about ebooks? Is there anything in your experience with getting your stuff in ebooks that was unusual?
Yeah. Naturally, you have both products. So if you're going forward as a self-publisher, you might as well be putting together a paperback and an ebook simultaneously. The process of creating an ebook, it can be daunting. I found it not to be too difficult as an engineer. Going through a new technical process wasn't so difficult, but you do have to get familiar with new softwares and things like this. However, in a sales perspective, I had at the beginning, it was about 50-50 paperback versus ebook. But as things continue, the paperback seems to be much more interesting. It's gone up to about 80% of sales. However, it could perhaps be the genre. So everyone's got once a runner sitting on their shelves. So if you're a distance runner and you want to have a tangible book sitting in your hands, it's not a genre book. It's not just buying the next crime fiction. It's something that's a little bit more personal to you. So perhaps my experience with the paper book ebook relationship is a bit unique there.
I just looked you up actually on Overdrive's marketplace to see what's available, and I don't have the Slumber here, but I do have the first 3 hairs, and it looks like they got it through draft to digital, I guess, aggregated some of these things.
That's
and the
right.
prices are quite reasonable, which is great.
Yeah, it's actually one subject that you come across often is you have a cost to a book. So a paperback, there's a bottom line that you got to cover at least. When you're writing something as a self-published author, there's some costs that you don't have to deal with, but then print on demand is rather high. So in this circumstance, you can be rather competitive, but you can't go too low to get yourself out there. Where an ebook, you can really get your costs down quite low, naturally, because it's a digital product that already exists. However, when you look at a large published book, they're selling these at the same price as paperbacks at the time, even though their costs, so they're making 1,000 times the cost on an ebook. As a self-published author, this is one of your opportunities to find the customers who are in the middle, who are not really sure. They have an option that's much more affordable. It's something that fits quite well as an overall plan for the author as well. So it becomes a good mix. And if a customer is more interested or very enthusiastic about your book, then they're going to want a paperback anyway.
And one thing I should tell you too is that it's not always easy for libraries to get your ebooks because Overdrive and Hoopla and a few other places will provide them, but not all authors make them available, or they don't make them affordable. Like, for example, if you are a superstar author, you can charge whatever you want for an ebook. And we are kind of forced to buy it, even at like $80, $90 a copy sometimes, simply because we circulate it. We are eating your lunch, supposedly. When I think of it more as we're just trying to reach more people and more customers who will buy your book. Because, if it's a paperback or a hardcover, it don't matter where we buy it from, we could circulate, but ebooks are tricky. But I'm glad that you are charging paperback prices for your books as ebooks and not $30, $40 a piece. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's another an area that the industry has been growing. So as we all know, Amazon is the monster. I think they're around 80% of all book sales is Amazon. And of course, when you're at 80%, you can do anything you want. But they have their own print house. So you can order a print on demand book through Amazon, and you can order an ebook that is published through Amazon. Some people will go wide with that. So you can go Amazon, and Amazon will also deliver out elsewhere. And then there's another group called Ingram, or Ingram Spark for self-publishing.
Yes.
So Ingram, most people do one or the other. What I've done, which is recommended, although more complicated, is I have an entire set of my books in Amazon to focus on only Amazon customer base. And then I have an entire other set at Ingram. And I can play different paths through that. So if you were to buy my ebook through iBooks through Apple, you would be going through that side of the business, and I can control the pricing and things like that. Discount prices for booksellers, for example. So you have a lot more control on what you're dealing with there. So for me, I actually have two completely different sets, and they're divided right down the middle. So Amazon only, and then everything else.
But
And
surprisingly, they're still connected anyway. Because what I understand is Ingram basically ships most of Amazon's single copy orders from their warehouse. And in fact, Ingram rep told me that last year it was like Christmas for 6 months straight because people were buying books and books and books and books. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting world, and putting the connections together is fascinating as a librarian, I'm sure as an author from your end. So yes. Are there any other questions from the audience?
I have a lot of questions.
How about one more, and then we'll close things out.
I'm just interested in that Excel creation template that you use. Is that something you discovered on your own that you crafted for yourself, or is that something that's out there and suggested?
both. So there's something called Snowflake methodology, and you can find it on the internet, and you can find an Excel table that goes through these pieces and parts. I've taken that and I've made it kind of my own. So I've got my own version of what that is. But Snowflake, for me, especially for any starting author, is a perfect way to go. It was recommended to me by David Lender, the author that I mentioned earlier. And the Snowflake says that the very first step is, please write one sentence that describes what your book is supposed to be. Now, you write it one time, then you write 10 more versions or 20 more versions, and then you kind of highlight the one you like the best at this moment of time. Then the next step is write down 3 sentences that go through the beginning, the middle, and the end of your book to kind of encapsulate it. And you do that process a few times around. And then you break it into paragraphs. So then you've got a short paragraph building upon each one of those sentences. And then you start adding in, what are the big moments in your book? What are the explosive things that are happening that change through the book? And if you want a 3-act system, there's kind of, I think it's four key areas. So as you transition from the different pieces from the first act, you've got a big explosive piece. Halfway through the second act is another one. And as you transition from the third, you then go into kind of the wrap up of the story. So as you build upon this structure, you slowly start building it like a snowflake. It's got sections for character development, timing. You can have whole worksheets on hair color, eye color, height, family history. So you can make a complete dossier about every one of your characters in here, building on the same method, very simple, and then you start evolving it. And then when you write your book, you're halfway through and you're not really sure, maybe the family history piece, because you're at 4 a.m. writing, you have this thing to look up and you always know exactly who all your characters are. So like I said, I used the common Snowflake method and then built my own worksheet, customized more of how I like to do things.
Great. So it's kind of like a genetic algorithm in some ways, but also like a showrunner's Bible in another, to make sure continuity stays in place. So
yeah, very much.
Excellent. Well, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you being here with us today, Jeff, and I want to thank our audience for turning out as well. Thank you. I wanted to let everybody know that we're doing this Read Write Local every Tuesday night for the rest of the summer at 7 o'clock Eastern. So if you're interested, just use the same URL you got here to tune in on the rest of them. I know you're probably going to be asleep, Jeff, but because you got a busy enough schedule as it is. But for anybody else, tune in and check out our webpage for more information. This has been Read Write Local Unbound, number 3. And this has been recorded, so we'll be able to see it eventually on our library website. And thank you again for helping educate a lot of people now and in the future about how writing can really work for you.